So first we talk nature, now we talk nurture, all right? So the nurture of behavior. Let me come on. Where is it? Okay. This is I guess I want to tie the evolution back in here. According to evolutionary theory, what happens is if a population of organisms gets physically isolated, you'll get rapid speciation, right? And so, I've seen these really wonderful images. You got a group of beetles, flightless beetles. Some beetles don't fly, whatever. So you got flightless beetles, and then a river comes through and cuts the population into two sides. And so there's two groups of beetles living on both sides of the river. And what'll happen is very quickly, within 50 generations or something, you're going to have two different species of beetles. It's like, wait, how did that happen? It happens very quickly when you isolate them. If they're allowed to interbreed and connect, then yeah, no, they don't speciate. But you isolate, and weird stuff happens very quickly. Okay, and so what happens is isolating human populations leads to different cultures. Okay, because we all came from out of Africa, but we went off to different places. And so what happens is different cultures arose because different environments had different pressures. If a group of human beings, they moved into Europe, then they had to deal with snow, right? And they had to figure out how to solve the problem of cold and etc. And some human beings, they moved up to Arabia or something, and they had to solve the problems of hot and desert and trying to get food in a desert, and so what happens is that different cultures emerge within different groups of humans in the same way that physical isolation creates different species up in evolutionary theory. Isolating human populations leads to different cultures to solve problems. Okay, so it's a neat parallel between these. Human behavior, by the way, most organisms, let's just say when you're running through your daily life, or any animal is running through their daily life, you have to solve a lot of problems. Okay, by far the majority of animal problem solving comes from instincts, things that they're born with. Human beings solve problems based on cultural learning far more. I mean, some of our problems we do solve with instinctive and reflexive mechanisms. If a baseball is flying at your eye, you're going to reflexively blink, right? So, a protective mechanism. But by far the majority of the problem solving you do is using the cultural tools, right? The tools that you learn through social learning. And it's a powerful, powerful idea. Okay? Look at the range here. Do you think it's wrong for unmarried couples to bear children? Right? In India, it's like, oh my goodness, that is the worst thing you can imagine. In Iceland, what's the problem? Okay, who cares? People are people. And so you can have this incredible range from, 85% to 5%, right? So clearly, cultural diversity is quite large. Some countries have little diversity, like Japan. In Japan, each individual they're almost all the same. In America, wow, I mean, we're just all over the board. Things that we might influence is like how we define beauty. Now, don't get me wrong, there are some universal standards of beauty that hold across all cultures, but yet there's a lot of culturally based beauty as well. How we define social justice, right? What is fair? What is right? Should we be expressive? Should we be reserved? Should we be outgoing? So, cultural diversity is quite powerful. So, within a culture, a norm is a standard of accepted or expected behavior. Okay, norms prescribe proper behavior. They tell you what you should do. Like punctuality. What is the norm? Should you be fashionably late? Well, in one cultural context, fashionably late. In my classes, on the dot, right? So norms are different in different places. One of the biggest norms that has been studied has been personal space, which is really how much distance is accept or would be proper between individuals that are interacting with each other. And you can see in this image, it's kind of yucky on my screen. Yeah. Now, I was looking good on my computer upstairs, but here it is. And so what we find is that in, say, for example, Saudi Arabia, well, Romania's the one they show you, is if you're with a close friend, you're supposed to be very, very close. If it's an acquaintance, 3 feet, and if it's a stranger, 4.6. So it's clearly, and the same basic pattern emerges across all cultures. Close relationships are a short distance, acquaintances followed by. But some cultures, like Saudi Arabia, think that, whoa, back up, right? No matter what. In the United States, we tend to have a larger personal space than and many other countries do. Um, and they don't have any, they are China. Okay. So anyway, you see that, and so norms. And so it's really, if you violate that, wow, check this one out, see what happens when you violate a norm, okay? So here's the deal. They went to the United States and Japan. Now, Japan has norms for non-expressiveness, okay? It's supposed to hide emotions. I think we talked about that one. And so what happens is that they did a study where somebody comes walking down the sidewalk, and then when they approach a stranger, they do one of three things. They either avoid looking at them, or they glance at them, or they look them in the eye and smile. Okay? And so the question is, what will the person approaching do? Meanwhile, there's a second experimenter following behind, watching. They don't know whether it's going to be an avoid, a glance, or a look and a smile. And so they're going to rate smiles. And in the United States, if you avoid somebody's eye contact, chances are they're not going to smile at you. If you glance at them, all of a sudden, 20% chance they'll smile at you. If you look them in the eyes and smile, it's quite likely they'll return the smile. But look at Japan. You avoid them, you glance at them, you look and smile. They're not going to smile at you. Okay, it just isn't going to happen. Interesting. All right, so there is some cultural similarity, like universal friendship norms, right? Within friends, you're supposed to respect privacy, make eye contact while talking, keep things private. Well, that's what it just says. And so there's some cultural similarity, and I don't know anything about the universal social beliefs dimension. Sounds like an interesting topic for somebody's paper. I don't know what it is. So you tell me. There's universal status norms that wherever people form status hierarchies, and yeah, in Asian cultures, what happens is there's two forms of language. There's regular, and then there's honor form, and so the younger person uses the honor form to the older person. Okay, so wherever there's hierarchies, you get this type of respectful talking to those above you. The incest taboo is universal, and there's norms that tend to be followed for war across the world, like wear identifiable uniforms. Although, which is why when we get into certain conflicts and we're like, it's not really a fair fight because they're blending in with the civilians and then blaming when civilians get shot. But anyway, these are universal norm, not completely obviously. And so we find that nature and nurture are clearly not separate from each other. They interact in a lot of ways. And so what happens is a physical trait, a characteristic might be beneficial in one environment and not in another, and so it might emerge. So as an interesting example, they actually, some anthropologists studied the cultures of the Hawaiian Islands, before European contact. And there's a lot of islands out there, okay? And so they were able to break it apart, and they found those places that were harsh. They had like a rocky coastline, and in order to eat, you had to send people out in boats, dangerous to get fish, and real dangerous. And in these places, what happened was a culture of masculinity kind of emerged. A man is a man and a woman is a woman. Huge gender role differences. But when there was a nice shallow lagoon around the island, where you just kind of walk out and just grab fish, and then all of a sudden, much more egalitarian or equal sex roles emerged. It just wasn't there. In other words, the human beings had the biological potential to create cultures with equal gender norms and different gender roles. And lo and behold, depending on the type of environment, depends upon which of our biological predispositional emerges. But, in other ways as well, though, people that are outgoing will influence the people around them, and no, that's a different one. No, never mind. But anyway, it clearly is such that, yeah, in fact, you know what? If a kid has a good mathematical genes, or whatever that means, right? They'll select math classes when they get to high school. Receiving the extra math stimulation will then modify their brain based on how they use it. So nature and nurture just kind of, the nature we have determines the nurture we go into, and the nurture we go into influences our nature right back. Okay? So it is a cycle. All right, so we'll come back on the last part of this topic, and we'll talk about the how nature and nurture interact. Of course, we could talk about how nature and nurture interacts in many different contexts, right? But we're going to talk about just one, and we're going to talk about gender. Okay?